and welcome to Unedited Economics. Today we're going to be giving you, I don't know why I say we. Today I'm going to be going over some basic economic policies and economic systems, which are very important. If you're interested in how the way the world works, this chapter is kind of going to explain why people do what we do. So let's talk about economic systems. There's many kinds of economic systems. Two of the most well-known are communism and capitalism. Now, any economic system is going to deal with a certain number of situations and questions it needs to answer, and you know whether something is an economic system if it answers these questions. There's 5 questions. The first one is what goods and services will be produced. How will the goods and services be produced? Who will get the goods and services? How will the system accept change? And how will the system promote progress? So let me give an example of each. So the first question, what goods and services will be produced? In capitalism, that's answered by demand or dollar votes, where people pay for what they want, which lets corporations know what they want to be produced. Therefore, the people decide what will be produced. The second question, how will goods and services be produced, is often answered by, in the communist system, by the government saying that all watches will be made in this factory on this street by these people. That's how. Who will get goods and services is also answered well by the communist system, which is equally, let's just go theoretically. In communism, everyone will get the same amount of that goods and service. The next question is, how will the system accept change? This is answered very well by capitalism, where change is constantly happening and there's always new development and progress, where if people are not buying something anymore, it will no longer be created. That's change. And then how the system will promote progress, answered very well by both capitalist and communist situations, where the last 2 questions are very similar, but don't get confused. There's a difference. Accept change and promote progress. Change is something that will constantly be happening. Progress is often something that systems need to take into consideration by themselves and work towards. So, with all of these questions that need to be answered, there's a couple of pieces of, sorry, my door just shut, some vocab that you have to focus on. The first one, very important, something I get kind of passionate about, is something known as the division of labor. Now, this has to go with another thing called specialization. Everything is, in general, more efficient when everyone has a certain job that they're really good at. This is why people go to college, is to get really good in one subject and be an expert in that, and then they can contribute to their society and their community with this. It's a little bit different when everyone is forced to do everything, and this is often seen in a communist society, where there's no longer a division of labor. You're told what to do, and that thing may change. I read a little bit about this in a book. I'm going to make another video. I'm trying not to get on that. So division of labor. When you think about your high school, there's different departments, and in each department there's people who studied. Like the social studies department has people who have majors in history and social studies and economics, and then in the math department it's going to be full of people who have degrees in mathematics, alright? And then those mathematics professors are really good at teaching math, instead of forcing a math teacher to teach social studies. So the next thing we have to talk about is private property. Now, private property and enterprise and choice are 3 things that separate a capitalist system from a communist system. And a communist system is defined by there being limited to no private property, limited to no choice, limited to no self-interest, and limited to no enterprise. This is because all of the 5 questions that I mentioned before are decided on by the communist government, whatever government that may be. So, in a capitalist society, on the other hand, things like enterprise, self-interest things that are motivated by you're the business owner, are what answers those 5 questions. And although there's a lot of government regulation and actual capitalism, if we're just talking about a theoretical free market system, those private property, which is going to allow people to make whatever they want, however they want to do it. And then enterprise, which is going to give people the entrepreneurial activity to go out and get rich in hopes that it's going to contribute to the economy. Choice, which is allowing people to decide what they're going to make. And then self-interest, which is ultimately pursuing those financial passions in hopes that you yourself are going to be making the profit. Whether or not you consider that a good thing, it is one of the things that separate capitalism from communism. So then we have to talk about markets. Just think for yourself what you in your head think of a market. Some people may think of their local Jewel-Osco. Some people may think of like an ancient market in the Middle East. I don't know, I just saw the movie Aladdin, it was so good. Market is anywhere people go to buy and sell goods. And when you think about old school markets, what might come to your head is barter. And I want to talk to you why barter doesn't work. Barter requires at least two parties to want to swap 2 things that are both meaningful to them. And this can run into a lot of problems because if there's a limited number of people you can trade with and you have oil and the other person has corn and you want corn but they don't want oil, it's hard for you to get what you want in that situation, which is why we have currency, is so you can give the corn and they can get the oil, whatever way around, and then you're left with currency, in which case you can go use in another transaction. So although barter is still used today in a lot of situations, especially small situations between neighbors, especially sharing, barter is not really something used too much in the grand scheme of economics. But for going on past bartering and looking at markets, we can talk about, in mostly capitalist systems, dollar votes. Now, dollar votes goes along with something called the invisible hand. Let's go way back to about the 16th century. Settlers were just landing in the Americas, and there was a guy named Adam Smith who's considered like the father of modern economics. It depends how you wish to see him. I personally don't have any serious opinions on him. That's a lie. I'll mention it later. Well, he says that in a capitalist economy, well, in his terms, the way that we answer those 5 questions are based on the consumers, and the way that they have their opinion is they use dollar votes, which I mentioned before, is when you pay for something, you're letting the market know that you want that thing. And then if every single consumer does that thing, then there's like an invisible hand kind of deciding what's going to be bought, what's going to be sold, what should no longer exist. Now, what's no longer going to exist is something called creative destruction, which is very important. Think about when you were a kid and there's probably some kind of electronic or toy that was at one point the best thing ever. Let's think about like a cassette tape or those headphones with little skinny wires and speakers the size of a quarter that you put on your ear. Those things were great at one point, but they no longer exist because they were replaced by something better like Beats headphones or iPod or, Spotify. And that original thing was destroyed, but in a good way. It's creative destruction. It was replaced by something better. It didn't just disappear. So now that we have those 5 questions and we understand, without touching the whole supply and demand graphs, how we make decisions, let's talk about this one very important graphic that determines basically how the entire world works when we're talking about the world of economics. So something called the circular graph. Circular graphic. Let's see if I can get this here. So when we were talking about markets before, we mentioned that markets are places where you go to buy and sell things. And when we're talking about economics, there's 2 main markets that we look at, the product market and the factor market. Now let's give a definition of each of these. So, okay, Oh, it just occurred to me, hopefully none of these words are backwards when I'm filming this. Okay. So let's give a quick definition. So we've got the product market, which is let's start at the factory market, which is also called the resource market. Now, when you're a business owner, you need certain materials to be creating goods and services. Let's talk about like land, labor, entrepreneurial activity. These are called the factors of production. There's more, I'll explain more. Now, let's look at the product market. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm out of breath. I just talked for 3 minutes straight. So the product market is a lot what consumers are familiar with. Imagine going to your local store and picking up your food or getting a massage or something like that. I've actually never gotten a massage, fun fact, like a professional one. And then we can look at the two places that go to these product and factor markets and what they buy and sell. So we've got households and we've got businesses. And we can look at the relationship of the households and businesses with each market. Focusing on the product market, households bring money. And what they do is they buy the goods and services that businesses bring. This is a lot like if you were to go to 7-Eleven, you'd be bringing your cash and you'd be buying a Slurpee. That's the goods and services of 7-Eleven. And what goes back is because you brought your cash, the businesses get your revenue, and in return, you get your goods and services, aka your Slurpee. On the other hand, we can look at the factor market and think about how that Slurpee was made. So, the factor market brings the factors of production, say in this case, the labor of whoever's selling you the cashier of the 7-Eleven, which is labor, and in return the businesses give the cost to the factor market, and that cost turns into income, who is the 7-Eleven cashier, brings that income back to his house. Income can take the form of salary, rent, any sort of return on money. And then that household supplied that labor to be the 7-Eleven cashier into the factor market. So in all, you get your Slurpee because the business was able to make the Slurpee from the households. My recommendation is to just write this over and over and over again, sometimes flipping where the factor market is or where the product market is, because you really want to memorize this. I didn't write this from memory. I did take a quick look at Google because I don't want to give anyone false information. An important fact to remember about this is that you're taking microeconomics, you don't have to worry about this. But if you're taking macroeconomics, there's another version of this graphic with the government in the middle, and we look at what the government gets out of the system in especially capitalist situation. This is 100% applicable to other economics systems, but the way that it was made was from Western economists. That's why it's taught in Western economics classes. So it does fit well with the capitalist system. You just have to, my recommendation is also to look at this through situations. Don't just say to yourself, goods and services, give it a goods and services. Just say the product market is the alley behind a building, and the goods and services is meth, and the expenditures is someone's, I don't know, fucking kid. If my relatives are watching, I did not swear, I coughed. So this is your general graphic. Really take a good look at it. If you want to switch the word factor to resource, it's the same thing. Don't get confused. If households or businesses are flipped, it's still the same graphic. But the reason that this is such an important graphic is it explains why we make decisions. Why do we go to work? We go to work because we need the income. Why do we need the income? Is because we need expenditures to take to the product market. Why do we need to go to the product market? Because we need the goods and services that the businesses provide for us to continue living. Why do we continue living? That's really your personal choice. I am not here to answer the big questions of life. However, economists often are the people who answer the big questions in life. So tell me what you think about the business cycle. That's not the business cycle. I'll talk about the business cycle in July. if you're taking an economics course and you have a test that's going to involve this, you need to memorize it. You can think of it situationally, just in case you get into a bit of a grind. On the AP test, before I took the test, I wrote this whole thing on the side because there will be questions on it. It's crucial. There's a lot of things in economics that are relative and everyone has different opinions on it, but this graphic is pretty much just as it happens in the real world. This isn't one of those major questions graphs. No one's writing their college thesis on this graphic. I did watch a TED Talk that incorporates a lot more factors into this. It's called Donut Economics. I totally recommend you to check that out. Donut Economics TED Talk. But this is one of my favorite chapters in economics because I think if you're passionate about the subject, it starts to answer a lot of the big questions that you have right in the beginning. All right.